For more than 2,000 years, one story has refused to fade, a story of a powerful civilization that rose to astonishing heights, challenged the gods themselves, and then vanished beneath the sea in a single catastrophic day and night, leaving behind no ruins we can point to with certainty, only questions that continue to haunt historians, archaeologists, and dreamers alike. In this video, we begin unraveling the myth of Atlantis, not to chase fantasy, but to understand where this story came from, why it has endured for so long, and what it may actually tell us about the ancient world and about ourselves. The story of Atlantis enters history through a single voice, the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, who introduced it in two of his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 BCE. What makes Atlantis so unique is that Plato did not present it as a vague legend or poetic metaphor, but as a detailed historical account, complete with geography, politics, architecture, and even moral lessons. He claimed the story was passed down through generations from the great Athenian lawgiver Solon, who allegedly learned it from Egyptian priests in the city of Sais, where records were said to be far older than anything preserved in Greece. According to Plato, Atlantis was a vast island empire located beyond the Pillars of Heracles, generally understood to mean the Strait of Gibraltar, placing it outside the Mediterranean in the open Atlantic Ocean. This civilization was described as extraordinarily advanced, possessing powerful navies, immense wealth, and sophisticated engineering, with concentric rings of land and water surrounding a central capital, walls plated in brass and orichalcum. Their society initially lived in harmony, guided by divine law, until greed and corruption took hold, provoking the gods to punish Atlantis by sinking it beneath the sea. From the very beginning, this narrative raises a crucial question that still drives debate today. Did Plato intend Atlantis to be read as literal history, or was it a philosophical allegory designed to convey moral and political lessons, especially in contrast to his idealized vision of ancient Athens, which he portrayed as virtuous, disciplined, and ultimately victorious against the corrupt Atlanteans, despite being vastly outnumbered? Many scholars argue that Plato, a master of storytelling and symbolism, crafted Atlantis as a cautionary tale about hubris, power, and moral decay, reflecting his broader philosophical concerns about the ideal state and the dangers of excess. They point out that no earlier Greek sources mention Atlantis, no independent ancient records confirm its existence, and Plato himself never completed the Critias dialogue, leaving the story unfinished and ambiguous. Yet others counter that Plato was unusually specific for a purely fictional tale, providing measurements, timelines, and geographic references that suggest he wanted his audience to consider the possibility that Atlantis was real, or at least rooted in real events, perhaps distorted through centuries of retelling. This tension between allegory and history is precisely what has allowed Atlantis to occupy a unique space between myth and mystery for over 2 millennia. As centuries passed, the story of Atlantis faded from mainstream scholarship, surviving mostly as a philosophical curiosity, until it was dramatically revived in the modern era, particularly during the 19th century. Advances in geology, archaeology, and oceanography sparked new interest in lost civilizations and catastrophic events, and writers began to reinterpret Atlantis not as Plato's moral fable, but as a prehistoric super-civilization whose destruction explained gaps in human history. One of the most influential figures in this revival was Ignatius Donnelly, whose 1882 book Atlantis, The Antediluvian World, argued that Atlantis was a real continent that sank due to a natural catastrophe. He theorized that it served as the source of ancient civilizations in Egypt, the Americas, and Europe, a theory that, while rejected by mainstream scholars, captured the public imagination and laid the foundation for countless later speculations. These speculations linked Atlantis to everything from advanced ancient technology to extraterrestrial influence. Throughout the 20th century, Atlantis became increasingly entangled with pseudoscience, occultism, and popular culture, appearing in novels, films, and television shows as a symbol of lost knowledge and forbidden power. This cultural evolution further blurred the line between Plato's original text and the modern myth, making it difficult for many people to separate what was actually written in ancient Greece from what has been added over time by imaginative reinterpretation. Yet despite these exaggerations, serious researchers have continued to investigate whether Plato's Atlantis could reflect real historical or geological events, particularly large-scale natural disasters that would have seemed world-ending to ancient observers. One of the most frequently discussed possibilities is the Bronze Age eruption of the Thera volcano, located on the island of Santorini, which occurred around 1600 BCE, and is considered one of the most powerful volcanic eruptions in human history. This eruption devastated the Minoan civilization on Crete, triggering massive tsunamis, ash fallout, and long-term climatic effects. Some scholars suggest that stories of a prosperous island culture destroyed by the sea could have traveled across the Mediterranean and eventually reached Plato, transformed by time and retelling into the grand narrative of Atlantis. Though critics point out that Plato explicitly placed Atlantis beyond the Mediterranean and described it as far larger than any known Aegean island, other hypotheses place Atlantis in locations ranging from Spain and Morocco to the Caribbean and even Antarctica, each proposal selectively aligning certain details from Plato's text with local geography while often ignoring others. A pattern that highlights how flexible the Atlantis story can become when treated as a puzzle to be solved, rather than a text to be interpreted within its historical context. Modern geology poses one of the strongest challenges to the idea of a sunken continent in the Atlantic, as plate tectonics and ocean floor mapping show no evidence of a large landmass disappearing within the time frame Plato described. While islands can sink due to volcanic or tectonic activity, the sudden submergence of a vast, advanced civilization remains unsupported by physical evidence. This does not mean, however, that Atlantis has no value as a historical source, because even if the city itself never existed as described, the story reflects very real ancient anxieties about natural disasters, political decline, and the fragility of human achievement. Themes that would have resonated deeply in a world where earthquakes, floods, and wars could erase entire cities within a single generation. It is also important to remember that Plato was writing at a time when Greek society was grappling with its own identity, looking back nostalgically at a perceived golden age, while facing political instability and moral uncertainty. Atlantis can be read as a mirror held up to his own world, a warning that power without virtue inevitably leads to destruction. Examining the most influential modern theories, the scientific objections that challenge them, and the psychological pull that keeps Atlantis alive in the human imagination, even in an age of satellites, sonar mapping, and advanced archaeology. Over the past centuries, Atlantis has been placed almost everywhere on Earth, from the shores of the Mediterranean to the depths of the Atlantic, from the sands of North Africa to the ice of Antarctica. This geographic chaos itself reveals something important. Atlantis often reflects the hopes, fears, and beliefs of the era searching for it, rather than new evidence uncovered from the ground or the sea. One of the most persistent modern theories situates Atlantis near southern Spain, particularly in the region around the Donana marshes, not far from the ancient city of Tartessos, a wealthy Bronze Age culture known from Greek sources. Proponents argue that this location fits Plato's reference to a powerful society near the western edge of the Mediterranean, possibly destroyed by flooding or seismic activity. But while satellite images and sediment studies have revealed traces of ancient settlements in the area, mainstream archaeologists caution that no evidence supports the existence of a technologically advanced empire matching Plato's detailed description, and the scale simply does not align with his account. Another widely discussed hypothesis links Atlantis to the Minoan civilization and the catastrophic volcanic eruption on Santorini. As mentioned in Part 1, this theory remains compelling because it is grounded in a real, well-documented disaster that devastated a sophisticated maritime culture. Yet critics emphasize that Plato's timeline places Atlantis thousands of years earlier than the Minoans, and his geographic description clearly situates the island beyond the Mediterranean, suggesting that if the Minoan eruption influenced the story, it was likely filtered through centuries of myth-making rather than preserved as direct history. Beyond Europe and the Mediterranean, Atlantis has also been associated with the Americas, especially during the 19th and early 20th centuries, when scholars and amateurs alike struggled to explain similarities between ancient cultures on opposite sides of the Atlantic, such as pyramidal structures or shared mythic motifs. This was before the development of modern archaeology and genetics clarified independent cultural evolution. While these transatlantic theories have largely been abandoned by serious researchers, they played a major role in shaping the popular image of Atlantis as a lost mother civilization that seeded the world with knowledge. Perhaps the most extreme claims place Atlantis in Antarctica, arguing that the continent was once ice-free and home to an advanced civilization before a sudden pole shift caused it to freeze. But this idea directly contradicts established geological and climatic evidence, which shows Antarctica has been covered in ice for millions of years. While such theories persist online and in fringe literature, they highlight how Atlantis often becomes a canvas for alternative histories that reject mainstream science rather than engage with it. From a scientific perspective, one of the strongest arguments against a literal Atlantis is modern oceanography, because detailed mapping of the Atlantic seafloor has revealed no sunken continent or massive submerged landmass that could match Plato's description. While underwater ruins and shipwrecks do exist, they are typically coastal settlements drowned by rising sea levels after the last ice age, not evidence of a sudden, catastrophic disappearance of an entire empire. This data forces researchers to ask whether Atlantis should be understood symbolically rather than geographically. Many classicists argue that the true significance of Atlantis lies in its role as a philosophical narrative crafted by Plato to explore themes of power, morality, and decline, especially in contrast to his idealized vision of ancient Athens. From this perspective, Atlantis functions much like a thought experiment, asking what happens when a society becomes technologically advanced but morally bankrupt, a question that feels just as relevant today as it did in ancient Greece. Yet even if Atlantis was intended as allegory, it may still preserve echoes of real events, because ancient societies frequently encoded memories of disasters, migrations, and collapses into myth. Stories of floods, sunken lands, and divine punishment appear in cultures across the world, suggesting a shared human effort to make sense of trauma and loss through narrative. The end of the last ice age, roughly 12,000 years ago, saw dramatic sea level rise that submerged vast coastal areas where early human communities likely lived. While these were not advanced empires with concentric canals and golden temples, the emotional impact of losing homelands to the sea could easily have been magnified and mythologized over generations, eventually inspiring stories like Atlantis that frame destruction on a grand, moral scale. What truly sustains the Atlantis myth, however, is not evidence, but psychology, because the idea of a lost golden age appeals deeply to human longing, offering the comforting belief that greatness once existed, was lost, and might somehow be recovered, a narrative that resurfaces whenever societies feel anxious about their future or disillusioned with the present. In the modern world, Atlantis often appears during periods of rapid technological change, environmental anxiety, or cultural uncertainty, functioning as both a warning and a fantasy, a reminder of what could be lost and a promise that hidden wisdom still lies just beyond our reach. Popular media has played a major role in keeping Atlantis alive, transforming it from a philosophical concept into a visual spectacle filled with crystals, advanced machines, and mystical powers. While these portrayals are entertaining, they often obscure the original text and distract from the more subtle, enduring questions the myth raises about civilization and collapse. Archaeology, by contrast, offers a quieter but more grounded lesson, showing that advanced societies have risen and fallen repeatedly throughout history, not because of divine punishment, but due to complex interactions between environment, economy, politics, and human decision-making. When viewed through this lens, Atlantis becomes less a mystery to be solved and more a metaphor for patterns we can observe again and again in the archaeological record. Importantly, no credible archaeological discovery to date has confirmed the existence of Atlantis as described by Plato, and responsible researchers emphasize the need for skepticism, careful sourcing, and respect for evidence, especially in an era where misinformation can spread rapidly online and extraordinary claims continue to require extraordinary proof. That said, the enduring fascination with Atlantis is not something to dismiss or ridicule, because myths often survive precisely because they touch on truths that statistics and data alone cannot express. Atlantis speaks to the fragility of human achievement, the power of nature, and the ethical responsibilities that come with knowledge and power. As climate change raises sea levels and threatens modern coastal cities, the story of a civilization swallowed by the ocean feels less like ancient fantasy and more like an unsettling mirror, reminding us that no society, no matter how advanced, is immune to environmental forces or the consequences of its own choices. In the end, unraveling the myth of Atlantis does not mean stripping it of wonder, but understanding why it matters, why it keeps resurfacing, and why each generation reshapes it in its own image. Because whether Atlantis was a real place, a distorted memory, or a philosophical invention, it continues to challenge us to reflect on our relationship with power, nature, and history itself. And perhaps that is why, even after 2,000 years, the lost city of Atlantis remains not at the bottom of the sea, but alive in the human mind.